It all started with the dust. A single figure walking up the long dirt road that cut straight through my father's land. The sun was high and mean that morning, and the dust kicked up around her like a ghost, clinging to the hem of her worn dress. She walked with a straight back, a heavy pack slung over one shoulder, and she didn't seem to care that she was leaving a trail a blind man could follow. It was like she wanted to be seen. My father, Samuel, stood on the porch, a tin mug of coffee in his hand. My brother Thomas and I sat on the steps below him, just two small kids trying to make sense of a world that had gone quiet 2 years before. Samuel watched her come, and I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. It wasn't curiosity in his eyes, it was something else. The cold, hard feeling that the little piece he'd scraped together was about to shatter into a million pieces. He'd gotten a letter from a widow down in town. It said all he needed to know. "Good worker," it read. "Mountain folk, no husband. Won't talk much, but she knows her way around a kitchen and won't flinch at a man's silence." That was enough for my father. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a pair of hands, someone to stop the silence from eating his children alive. Our mother Anna was gone. The fever took her in the spring, and she was buried under the big willow at the edge of the property. I barely remembered her face. My brother Thomas never said her name, so he hired help. That's what he told himself. For us, not for him. The woman didn't knock. She walked right through the gate, her boots scuffed but her steps certain. She just nodded at my father, like she knew this land wasn't really his. The land owned you out here, not the other way around. She slid the pack from her shoulder and just waited. Her silence was heavy, not shy, practiced, carved from stone. "You'll want to meet them first," Samuel said, his voice rough as gravel. He motioned to us. I looked up at her, trying to measure her the way a girl who's already lost too much measures everyone. Thomas, younger and smaller, clutched a little wooden horse and hid behind our father's leg. "She'll be staying on for a while," Samuel said, "helping with chores. I expect manners." The woman's eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, like the sky right before a storm. She knelt down slowly, so she was on our level. She didn't smile. She just looked at us. And in her eyes, I saw a flicker of something I didn't understand. It looked like sadness, but it felt like recognition. She held out a hand, not to shake, but just open, an offering. I gave a tiny, hesitant wave. Thomas just stared, and just like that, it was settled. Samuel pointed her toward the kitchen and the water pump, then went back to mending the barn, leaving us alone with the stranger. He came back that evening to a house that didn't feel like his own. The air, usually stale with dust and quiet grief, was filled with the smell of cornbread and simmering beans. It smelled like a memory he couldn't place. The woman moved around the kitchen with a quiet efficiency that was almost unnerving. She didn't speak a word to him. She didn't scold Thomas when he dropped his spoon. She didn't flinch when I stared at her, my chin resting in my hands. After supper, she cleared the plates, wiped the table and sat by the fire, mending one of my frayed shawls. The only light was the dancing flames, casting long shadows on the log walls. Finally, my father broke the silence. "Should have asked before," he said, his voice low. "What should we call you?" She didn't look up from her stitching. Her voice, when it came, was so soft it was almost swallowed by the crackling fire. "Cora." Just that. No last name, no story, no explanation for the ancient sadness in her eyes. And something about the way she said it, the finality of it, made my father tuck all his questions away. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why she looked at his children like she was terrified of loving them. He didn't ask. But he should have. For a week, the house changed. It wasn't just the food, or the clean floors, or the mended clothes. It was the sound. The silence that had lived in the corners of our home for 2 years began to retreat. Cora spoke only to us children, and only in soft tones. But her presence was a constant, steady hum. I started following her around like a puppy, watching her knead dough, her hands strong and sure. Thomas, who hadn't said more than 2 words at a time since our mother died, started humming at the dinner table. A small, tuneless sound that was the most beautiful music my father had ever heard. The children weren't just healing, they were blooming. And Samuel watched it happen with a growing unease in his chest. This woman, this Cora, was she a blessing, or was she a ghost, come to fill a space that should have stayed empty? He told himself it was for the best. He told himself he was grateful. But every time he saw Thomas reach for her hand, or saw me lay my head in her lap while she read a story, a cold knot tightened in his gut. Then, one morning, it happened. The one word that broke the fragile peace wide open. Thomas was in the kitchen, trying to climb onto a stool to reach the biscuit jar. He slipped, tumbling to the floor with a cry of pain and surprise. Cora was there in an instant, kneeling beside him, her hand already reaching for a cloth to wipe away the tears and the scrape on his knee. And in that moment of pain and confusion, a word slipped from my brother's lips. A word he hadn't said in 2 years. A word that didn't belong to the woman kneeling before him. Mama. Samuel froze in the doorway, a pail of water crashing from his hand. The water sloshed across the porch, but he didn't notice. He couldn't hear anything but that single, impossible word echoing in the suddenly silent kitchen. Thomas didn't even realize what he'd said. He was just a little boy with a scraped knee, looking for comfort. But Cora knew. Her face went pale as bone. The cloth fell from her hand. She looked like the ground had just crumbled away beneath her feet. She stood up, her movements stiff and jerky, and without a word, she fled out the back door. I stood there, staring from my father's shocked face to the empty doorway where Cora had been. I didn't understand what had happened. I just knew that one little word had shattered something. That night, Cora didn't come to the table for supper. Samuel found her later, behind the smokehouse, her back to the house, staring out at the darkening hills. Her hands were trembling. He didn't mean it, Samuel said, his voice quieter than he intended. He's just a boy. He don't remember Anna's face. Cora didn't turn. I know. You're just someone kind. He feels safe. She finally looked at him, and in the fading light, he saw that her eyes were rimmed with red. Her voice was a raw whisper. I never had children. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact, delivered with such profound, bottomless sorrow that it struck Samuel silent. It was a truth that felt heavier and more painful than any lie she could have told. And in that moment, he realized Cora wasn't just a woman looking for work. She was a woman haunted by a different kind of silence. A silence where a child's laughter should have been. A silence that my brother had just accidentally filled. The air in the house grew thick and heavy after that. Tense. Cora tried to keep her distance, but a child's love doesn't understand walls. It just keeps climbing. Thomas clung to her more than ever, his small hands always finding the fabric of her skirt. I was quieter about it, but I watched her with a fierce, protective loyalty. Cora was trying to pull away, but my brother and I were pulling her back, tying her to us with invisible threads of affection. And Samuel, he just watched, caught in the middle, not knowing whether to cut the threads or help us tie the knots. Then came the letter. It wasn't for him. He found it by accident. Cora kept a small sewing kit in her traveling pack, and a needle had broken. When Samuel went to fetch a new one for her, his fingers brushed against a piece of crumpled, folded parchment tucked deep in a side pocket. He shouldn't have looked. He knew that. It was her private business. But he did. He pulled it out. The paper was old, the edges soft and frayed. The ink was faded, the handwriting jagged and desperate. He read the words, and the floor seemed to drop out from under him. It was a warning. A few short, brutal lines from someone in a mining town up north. He knows you're alive. He's asking questions. Says you stole his child. There's a bounty on your head, Cora. Don't come back here. He's not the man you knew. He's meaner now, And he's not looking for you. He's looking for her. The last line was nearly illegible, smudged as if by a tear. They say he buried an empty coffin. Samuel sat down hard on the cabin floor, the letter trembling in his hand. A bounty. A stolen child. An empty coffin. The quiet, sad woman who baked his bread and hummed his son to sleep was a fugitive, and the ghost she was running from wasn't a memory. It was a man who thought she'd stolen his child. He confronted her the next morning, not with anger, but with a cold, quiet dread. He held out the letter. She flinched as if he'd slapped her. "I didn't mean to lie," she whispered, her face ashen. I had nowhere else to go." "The child," Samuel said, his voice hoarse. "The letter says you stole a child." Her eyes filled with a pain so raw it was terrifying. "He lied," she choked out. "She was mine. He took her from me." "Who?" "My husband," she whispered, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "He told everyone I was unstable, that I'd hurt her. He had friends, powerful men. They put a bounty on my head so I could never come back, so I could never look for her." Samuel stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity, the sadness in her eyes, the way she'd recoiled when Thomas called her Mama. The fact that she'd told him she'd never had children. It wasn't a confession, it was a lament. She wasn't running from the law. She was running from a lie that had stolen her life. "Where is she?" Samuel asked, his heart aching for this woman he barely knew. Cora shook her head, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've been looking for years, but he's always one step ahead. He lets the rumor of the bounty follow me, so I can never settle, can never ask questions." She looked at him, her gaze desperate, pleading. "He buried an empty coffin to make everyone think she was dead, so I would stop looking, but I know she's out there. I can feel it." And Samuel Greaves, the hard, quiet man who thought he was just hiring help, realized he hadn't let a housekeeper into his home. He'd let in a storm, and it was about to break right over their heads. The next morning, the house was still. Too still. A dead, hollow quiet that felt colder than any winter morning. Samuel woke before dawn, a feeling of dread coiling in his stomach. He didn't hear the usual soft rustle from the kitchen. The air didn't smell of coffee and wood smoke. He stepped into the main room and knew. The fire was dead ash. The water bucket was empty. She was gone. On the small kitchen table where she usually left out fresh-baked bread was a single folded note. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It held no goodbyes, no apologies. Just 4 words. "I shouldn't have stayed." Samuel stood there, the note in his hand, and a bitter, white-hot anger surged through him. It was the same helpless fury he'd felt when the doctor told him Anna wasn't going to make it. The fury of a man watching his world crumble, powerless to stop it. He hadn't just lost a housekeeper. His children had lost the only warmth they'd known in 2 years. And he'd be damned if he was going to let her just vanish into the wilderness. He saddled his horse before the sun was fully up. He left me and Thomas with a neighbor, telling us he'd be back by nightfall. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't have to. I looked at him with my mother's sharp, knowing eyes. "Is she scared, Papa?" I asked. He didn't know how to answer. He just rode. He found her by the river, not 5 miles from the homestead. She was sitting by the water's edge, her pack beside her, looking small and defeated against the vast, empty landscape. She didn't look up when he dismounted. "Figured I'd find you near water," he said, his voice even. "You always fill the buckets first thing." She didn't move. "I tried to be gone," she whispered, her voice rough. "I walked all night, but my feet wouldn't take me any further." "Why'd you run?" "You saw the letter," she said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were swollen and raw. "That man, my husband Jedediah, he's not just cruel, he's clever. He'll use that bounty to hunt me forever. Anyone who helps me, he'll hurt them. I couldn't bring that darkness to your door, to your children." "That's my choice to make," Samuel said gruffly. "No, it's not!" Cora stood, her hands clenched into fists. You don't understand. I'm not just running from him. I'm running from myself. When your son, when he called me, Mama, it didn't just hurt. It felt like a betrayal to my own daughter. Her voice cracked, the truth spilling out of her like blood from a wound. Her name is Hazel. She would be 7 now. She had hair the color of corn silk and a laugh that could make wildflowers grow. And Jedediah took her. He convinced the whole town I was mad, that I was a danger to her. And then he vanished. She was pacing now, the story pouring out of her in a torrent. He didn't just take my daughter. He took my name. He turned me into a monster, a kidnapper. He put a price on my head so that every person I met would see me as a criminal, not a grieving mother. So that if I ever got close to finding her, he could use the law to snatch her away again. Samuel stood silent, listening to a story of a pain so deep it was almost unimaginable. I'm tired of running, Sam, she whispered, her shoulders slumping. But I'm more tired of hoping. Every time I let myself feel something, every time I start to build a life, the ghost of him finds me. And I will not let him find me here. I won't let him cast his shadow on your children. She thought she was poison, a danger to them. She was leaving to protect them from a life on the run. Samuel took a step closer. He wasn't a man of soft words or easy comfort. He was a man of action. Then we stop running, he said, his voice low but firm. Cora stared at him, confused. What? He's hunting you because you're alone, because you're an easy target, but you're not alone anymore. He took another step, his gaze unwavering. You come back with me. You come back to my children. You come back home. It's not my home. The hell it isn't, he said, the words surprising even himself. You put the warmth back in it. You gave my children their voices back. You think I'm just going to let you walk away from that? He reached out and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. Come back, Cora. Why? She whispered, her eyes searching his. Because they miss you already. And because I think I'm not ready to let you go either. The words hung in the air between them, more real and solid than the river or the mountains. It wasn't about pity. It wasn't about need. It was something else, something new and fragile and fierce, taking root in the barren soil of their lives. And as he led her back toward the homestead, Samuel knew he wasn't just bringing back a housekeeper. He was bringing home a fighter. And the war was coming to their doorstep. When we saw them riding back together, I didn't say a word. I just ran to Cora and pressed a small red ribbon from my hair into her hand. Thomas, my quiet Thomas, wrapped his arms around her leg and held on tight, as if he was afraid she might blow away in the wind. That night, something shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding, a silent pact. We were a fortress now, small, isolated, but a fortress all the same, and Cora began to change. The haunted look in her eyes was replaced by a slow-burning fire. She still cooked and cleaned and cared for us, but there was a new purpose in her movements. She was no longer a guest. She was a guardian. The silence between her and Samuel became comfortable. A shared glance across the dinner table, a brief touch of hands as they passed in the narrow hallway. They were two solitary people learning the language of being a pair. Then, one night, a knock came at the door. It was late, a hard, deliberate rap that cut through the sound of the whistling wind. My father had been mending a latch. Cora was humming a lullaby to Thomas. Samuel opened the door to a man standing in the shadows. He was tall, dressed in a long leather coat, his face weathered and hard. But it wasn't his appearance that made my father's gut clench. It was his eyes. They were cold, searching, and they darted right past Samuel, into the heart of the house. "Looking for a woman," the man said, his voice a low growl. "Goes by Cora." Behind him, Samuel heard Cora's humming stop. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. "Why?" Samuel asked, his body tensing, blocking the doorway. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smirk. "Old business. She'll remember me." Samuel saw the color drain from Cora's face. She knew this man, and she was terrified. "Well, hello, darling," the man drawled, his eyes locking on her. "Been a long time." He took a step forward. Samuel didn't move. "You're not welcome here," Samuel said, his voice flat and cold as iron. The man chuckled, a nasty grating sound. "You don't even know what she is, do you? You've let a thief and a kidnapper into your home." "I know enough." "I doubt it." Just as the man took another step, Samuel's hand moved, quick as a snake, to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. The metallic click of the hammer being pulled back was the loudest sound in the world. "You take one more step," Samuel said, his voice dangerously low, "and the only thing you'll be collecting is a hole in the ground." The stranger paused, his eyes flicking from the rifle back to Samuel's face. He weighed his odds. Then he sneered. "Not worth it," he muttered. "The bounty's probably gone cold anyway." Bounty. The word hung in the air, a confirmation of the letter's poison. The man turned and melted back into the darkness, his coat flapping like a crow's wing. Samuel slammed the door, bolted it, and turned to face Cora. Thomas was crying now, frightened by the loud voices. Cora held him tight, her own body trembling. "He won't be back," Samuel said, trying to reassure her. But Cora stared at the bolted door, her eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond the man who had just left. It was as if the past itself had just kicked down their door and refused to leave. And in that moment, as I ran to her side and Thomas whimpered the word "Mama" into her shoulder, Cora's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, pulling us both into a desperate embrace, as if we were the only anchors in a world that was trying to sweep her away. Samuel stood over them, the rifle still in his hand, his heart pounding with a fierce, protective rage he hadn't felt in years. The man was gone, but Samuel knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was only the beginning. The real storm was still coming. The stranger's visit left a scar on our quiet life. Sleep didn't come easy for any of us after that. Cora would sit by the window for hours after we were in bed, watching the dark, silent tree line. Samuel would sit with her, the rifle never far from his hand. They rarely spoke. They didn't need to. They were sentinels, guarding the fragile peace they had built. A week later, another rider came. This one wore a sheriff's star. Sheriff Tobias Langley was a fair man, but his face was grim as he sat at our kitchen table. "A man came through town," Langley said, his eyes on Cora. "Name of Silas Kane, a bounty hunter. Said he was tracking a woman wanted for kidnapping in the Northern Territories. A woman named Cora." Cora flinched, but she didn't look away. "It was a lie," she said, her voice steady. "I figured as much," the sheriff said. "I sent a wire up north. The warrant for your arrest was dropped 6 years ago. They thought you died trying to cross the Snake River. Officially, you don't exist." A wave of relief washed over Cora's face, so profound it was almost painful to see. She was free. The lie that had haunted her for years had finally lost its power. "But that's not why I'm here," Langley continued, his expression darkening. "This man, Kane, he wasn't working for the law. He was working for your husband, Jedediah." Cora's blood ran cold. "Jedediah is alive?" "He is," Langley confirmed. "And he's not just looking for you anymore. Kane was asking questions all over town, not just about a woman. He was asking about a little girl with hair like corn silk. He was looking for Hazel. The fragile hope that had just bloomed in Cora's heart withered and died. Jedediah knew she was alive, and now he was actively hunting for their daughter. "He can't find her," Cora whispered, a desperate plea in her voice. "You have to help me. I have to find her first." Sheriff Langley shook his head slowly. "I can't. My jurisdiction ends at the county line. But I have a friend, a lawman in Cedar Hollow. It's a long shot, but it's the last place I heard a whisper of Jedediah's name years ago. If she's anywhere, she might be there." Cedar Hollow. It was a name, a direction, a tiny spark of hope in a vast darkness. "I'm going," Cora said, her voice filled with a new, unshakable resolve. "You won't go alone," Samuel said, standing beside her. And so, we packed the wagon. It wasn't a trip, It was a quest, a race against a monster to find a lost little girl. The journey was 3 days of hell, mud, rain, a broken axle. But we were a unit, bound by a shared purpose. When we finally rode into the small, dusty town of Cedar Hollow, my heart was pounding. Cora's hands were shaking as she clutched the scrap of paper with the sheriff's directions. The town was nestled in a green valley with a small white chapel at its center. They said to check the missionary school, Cora murmured, her voice tight. Samuel helped her down from the wagon. He didn't offer his arm. He took her hand. Thomas and I followed, clinging to them. The chapel door creaked open. Inside, a dozen children sat in rows, listening to a woman read from a book. As the light from the doorway spilled into the room, a young girl at the back turned around. She had dark hair, not blonde, but her eyes, they were Cora's eyes, wide and startled and full of a deep, old soul. Cora stopped breathing. Every sound in the world faded away. "Hazel?" she whispered, the name a fragile prayer. The girl's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. She stood up. She started to walk, then run. Cora met her in the aisle, sinking to her knees as her long-lost daughter crashed into her arms. They clung to each other, two halves of a shattered heart made whole again, their sobs echoing in the silent chapel. Samuel stood in the doorway, his own eyes burning, with me and Thomas holding his hands. We watched as a mother found her child. We watched as Cora's ghost was finally laid to rest. Or so we thought. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking. Hazel had been raised by the missionary family after Jedediah had abandoned her, leaving her with a story that her mother was a wicked woman who had tried to sell her. For years, Hazel had believed the lie. It took 2 days in that small town to unravel the poison Jedediah had spun. 2 days of tears and stories and quiet moments of reconnection. When we left Cedar Hollow, Hazel was with us, her hand held tight in Cora's. The 5 of us, a strange, patched-together family, heading home. The homestead felt different when we returned. It was fuller, louder. The silence was gone for good, replaced by the sound of 3 children laughing. Hazel and I became inseparable. Thomas followed his new big sister everywhere. Cora was transformed. The weight of her past had been lifted. She laughed freely. She sang in the kitchen. She looked at Samuel with an open, unguarded affection that made his heart ache in the best possible way. One evening, as we all sat by the fire, I curled up beside Cora and whispered, "Now I have a big sister and a mama." Cora kissed my forehead, her eyes shining. She looked across the room and met Samuel's gaze. He smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. And in that look, a promise was made, a future was decided. But peace is a fragile thing in a hard country. 3 weeks later, a rider came galloping up the road, his horse lathered in sweat. It was a deputy from Sheriff Langley's office. He didn't dismount. He just leaned down, his face pale and urgent. "It's Jedediah," he panted. "He knows you have the girl. He rode into town last night not looking for a bounty. He was looking for a fight. He said he's coming to get what's his, and Sheriff Langley said to tell you, he's not coming alone." Samuel's face hardened. He looked from the deputy to the house, where his 3 children and the woman he'd come to love were finally happy, finally safe. Jedediah wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a storm on the horizon, and he was coming for all of them. The news landed like a physical blow. The air in the cabin, so recently filled with laughter, turned thick with dread. Hazel's face went white. She had just escaped her father's shadow, and now it was stretching long and dark, all the way to our door. "We can't run," Cora said, her voice low and fierce. Her eyes, which had finally lost their haunted look, now blazed with the fire of a she-bear protecting her cubs. "There's nowhere left to go. This is our home." "Then we fight," Samuel said simply. There was no fear in his voice, only a cold, hard resolve. This was his land. This was his family, and he would defend it to his last breath. The next few days were a blur of grim preparation. Samuel didn't just bar the doors, he fortified the house. He boarded up the back windows, leaving only small slits to see through. He dug a shallow trench along the front of the porch. He showed Cora and Hazel how to load and fire the old rifle and the shotgun he kept in the barn. He even uncovered a secret his own father had built into the cabin years ago. A small, hidden trapdoor beneath the kitchen floorboards, leading to a cramped, dark cellar. "If they breach the house," he said, his voice grim, "you take the children and you get in here. You don't make a sound no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" Cora and Hazel nodded, their faces pale but determined. We were no longer just a family. We were a garrison, preparing for a siege. The waiting was the worst part. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, sent a jolt of fear through us. We were living on a knife's edge, anticipating the moment the world would fall apart. It came on the fourth night. A dog started barking down the ridge, a frantic, terrified sound that was cut short with a pained yelp. Silence. Then, the sound of hoofbeats. Not one rider. Many. "They're here," Samuel said, grabbing his rifle. "Get the children to the cellar. Now!" Cora and Hazel herded us toward the trapdoor. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Thomas was crying silently, his small body trembling. Hazel, brave Hazel, held us close. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though her own voice shook. "Papa and Mama will protect us." Cora looked at us one last time, her face a mask of love and terror. "I love you," she whispered, before closing the heavy door over our heads, plunging us into darkness. Above us, we heard the floorboards creak as Samuel and Cora took their positions. Then, a voice boomed from outside, dripping with malice. "Cora! I know you're in there, you thieving whore! You bring me my daughter or I'll burn this place to the ground with you in it!" It was Jedediah. We heard Samuel's voice, cold and steady. "She's not your daughter, and this is not your land. Turn around and ride away, and you might live to see the sunrise." A cruel laugh echoed through the night. "I'm not alone, old man. I brought friends." Then, the world exploded. Gunshots erupted, shattering the night. Wood splintered, glass broke. The whole cabin shook as men threw themselves against the door. Above us, we could hear Samuel and Cora firing back, the roar of the rifle and the shotgun deafeningly loud in the small space. It was a nightmare of noise and terror. We huddled together in the dark, praying, listening to the sounds of the life-or-death battle raging just a few feet above our heads. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the back of the cabin, followed by a triumphant yell. They had broken through. We could hear footsteps, heavy boots thudding on the floorboards, men shouting, the sound of a struggle. Then, a voice we recognized, twisted with rage. "Jedediah. Where is she? Where did you hide her?" We heard Cora's voice, defiant and unbroken. "You'll never find her." A sickening thud. Cora's cry of pain. In the cellar, Hazel let out a small, choked sob. I held my breath, terror coiling in my stomach like a snake. Then we heard Samuel roar like a wounded animal. More gunshots, closer this time. A man screamed. Another crash. And then, silence. A dead, ringing silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise. We waited, huddled in the darkness, for what felt like an eternity. What had happened? Who was left standing? Slowly, shakily, the trapdoor above us creaked open. A figure was silhouetted against the dim light from the cabin. It was a man, holding a lantern. But it wasn't Samuel. It was Jedediah. His face was bruised and bloody, a crazed, triumphant grin stretching his lips. He held a pistol in his other hand. "There you are," he snarled, his eyes locking on Hazel. "Come on out, girl. Time to go home." My blood ran cold. We were trapped. Jedediah stood in the opening, a monster blocking our only escape. His eyes were wild, his grin feral. Behind him the cabin was a wreck. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and on the floor, I could see my father, Samuel, lying still. Too still. And Cora was on her knees, another man holding her back, a knife to her throat. Her face was bruised, but her eyes blazed with a hatred so pure it was a physical force. "Leave them alone, Jedediah," she spat, her voice raspy. "Shut up," he sneered, not even looking at her. His focus was entirely on Hazel. "I told you to come out, girl. Don't make me come down there." Hazel, who had been trembling, suddenly went rigid. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something else, a cold fury I had never seen before. She looked at Cora, then at Samuel's unmoving form on the floor, and a decision was made. She started to climb the ladder. "No, Hazel, don't!" Cora screamed, struggling against the man holding her. But Hazel ignored her. She climbed out of the cellar, her small shoulders squared, and stood before the man who had tormented her entire life. "You wanted me?" she said, her voice small but steady. "Here I am. Let them go." Jedediah laughed, a horrible, gloating sound. "Brave girl. You get that from me." He reached out to grab her arm. And in that instant, everything happened at once. From the floor, Samuel groaned. He wasn't dead. He moved, slowly, painfully, his hand reaching for something on the floor beside him, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. At the same time, Cora, seeing Jedediah distracted, slammed her head backward into the face of the man holding her. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all she needed. She stomped down hard on his foot, twisted out of his grasp, and launched herself not at Jedediah, but at the lantern he had set on the floor. She kicked it over. Oil and flame spilled across the wooden floorboards, igniting instantly. Fire roared to life, a wall of flame separating Jedediah from the door. He spun around, shocked. And in that moment of hesitation, Samuel was on his feet. With a guttural roar, he swung the iron poker, striking Jedediah's gun hand. The pistol went flying. "Get the children out!" Samuel yelled, placing himself between us and the fire. Cora grabbed my hand and Thomas's. "Hazel, come on!" But Hazel was frozen, staring at the flames, her eyes wide with a terrible, dawning realization. The missionary family. They had told her stories Jedediah had fed them, about how her mother's family had all died. "He told them," Hazel whispered, her voice trembling. "He told them my mother's family died in a fire he set." Cora froze, her blood turning to ice. Jedediah wasn't just a liar and a brute. He was a murderer. Jedediah, seeing his escape cut off by the flames, turned back with a snarl, lunging for Samuel. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. The fire was spreading fast, smoke filling the cabin, choking us. "We have to go!" Cora screamed, pulling us toward the broken back window. She shoved me and Thomas through, then turned to grab Hazel. But Jedediah had fought his way free of Samuel. He grabbed Hazel, pulling her back, using her as a shield. "You're not taking her!" he shrieked, his eyes wild with madness and the reflection of the flames. Samuel was on the floor, struggling to breathe in the thick smoke. Cora was outside screaming Hazel's name. It was over. Jedediah had won. And then, something impossible happened. A gunshot, not from inside the cabin, from outside. Jedediah stiffened. A look of surprise crossed his face. A dark red stain blossomed on the front of his shirt. He staggered, his grip on Hazel loosening. He looked down at his chest, then back up, his eyes full of confusion. He collapsed to the floor. Standing in the yard, silhouetted against the burning cabin, was Sheriff Langley. And he wasn't alone. He had a posse of armed men with him. He had come back. He had saved us. Cora scrambled back through the window, ignoring the flames, and pulled a coughing, crying Hazel into her arms. I helped Samuel to his feet, and we all stumbled out of the burning remains of our home, into the cool night air. We stood there, a small, broken, smoke-stained family, and watched our house burn to the ground. The place where we had found each other, where we had healed, was gone. But as Cora held Hazel tight, and Samuel wrapped a steadying arm around both of them, I knew we hadn't lost everything. The house was just wood and nails. Our home, the real one, was standing right there in the ashes, holding on to each other. The war was over, and against all odds, we had survived. We didn't rebuild. Not there. The fire took the cabin, and with it, the ghosts that had haunted its walls. Sheriff Langley and his men buried Jedediah and his crew in unmarked graves on the ridge, leaving the land to the wind and the silence. We stayed in town for a few weeks, living in a small room behind the general store. Samuel's arm had been broken in the fight, and Cora had burns on her hands from the lantern. We were all bruised, all scarred, but we were alive, and we were together. The town, hearing our story, rallied around us. They gave us food, clothes, and something more valuable, a new beginning. A rancher whose wife had passed away was selling his land cheap. A small, sturdy house, a good barn, and acres of green pasture nestled in a peaceful valley, miles away from the memory of the fire. With the town's help, we made it our own. The 5 of us. Samuel, his arm in a sling, but his eyes clear and steady. Cora, her hands bandaged but her heart finally at peace. Hazel, my new sister, quiet, but with a strength that rivaled the mountains. Thomas, my little brother, who started laughing again. And me. We built a new life from the ashes of the old one. Samuel and Cora were married by the town preacher a month later, in a simple ceremony under a big oak tree. There were no fancy clothes or big celebrations, just us, the sky, and a promise. A promise to be a family, forged not by blood, but by fire and love. The past never disappears completely. The scars remain, but they fade. They become a part of who you are, a reminder of the battles you've won. Cora never forgot the years she lost, but she filled the empty spaces with new memories. Teaching Hazel to bake bread, braiding my hair in the mornings, watching Samuel teach Thomas how to ride a pony. Our house was always filled with warmth now. The silence was gone forever. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I think about that first day. The woman walking out of the dust, a ghost with a heavy pack and sad eyes. She came to our door looking for a job, a place to hide. She didn't know she was really looking for a place to belong. And my father, a man drowning in his own silence, thought he was just hiring help. He didn't know he was opening the door to the rest of his life. It just goes to show, you never know what's coming up that long, dusty road. Sometimes it's a storm, and sometimes it's a miracle. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more tales of survival, justice, and the strange twists of fate that can change a life forever, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what story is waiting just around the corner.